We can probably go ahead and get started. I know these meetings are being recorded. And so for many people around the world who are probably sleeping right now because they've been participating in many of the others, that they can come back and watch this at a better time for them. So why don't we go ahead and get started and we have a lot to discuss today. So first of all, I'd just like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, maybe for those of you like Graham, who has probably been around the world already once today. Thank you for joining us, whether you're joining us live or recorded later, especially for those of you who have joined all of the sessions. I appreciate all the incredible sessions that have already happened from our colleagues across the world, and those of you who've already contributed to World Access to Higher Education Day. I'm really honored that the US can be a part of this. This year's World Access to Higher Education Day comes at a time when students from all over the world, particularly students who have been underserved, are facing new and in some ways seemingly insurmountable barriers to access to and success in higher education. I think that's why these discussions today are so important. But even before the pandemic, higher education faced growing scrutiny about its role in contributing to these severe societal equity gaps. In the US, those afflict Black and Latinos, as well as Native Americans and other historically underserved groups. The pandemic's impact on higher education impacted us all really early in March, and it was a pretty profound impact immediately. And the economic crisis that came with it and hit many of the colleges and universities immediately exacerbated many of the challenges that students from racial minorities, from low-income backgrounds, and of those who are working adults. And it's raising important questions about access to and equity in post-secondary education. Those who are already struggling financially and emotionally before the pandemic were affected more during it. The confluence of this pandemic, severe unemployment, racial injustice in the US and around the world has exposed the daunting challenges ahead. And none of the pandemic's disproportionate impacts on post-secondary education should really be a surprise to any of us, but the crises have actually accelerated these problems and while also worsening them in many places. At Lumina Foundation, we have a singular focus on tertiary education. We work toward a specific and ambitious goal to increase the percent of Americans with degrees and high quality credentials to 60% by 2025. Currently, we sit at about 51%. To that end, we focus all of our efforts toward creating a high quality, affordable tertiary system that serves all Americans, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, income, or geography. Policies, practices, and beliefs rooted in history and still affecting people today, especially keep many Black, Native American, and Hispanic people from education and skills they need. These systems unfairly hold back individuals, future students, who are seeking a better education and a better life. At Lumina, we believe that real change can only happen through systemic and policy change. Deliberate policies created or contributed to these unjust conditions, and it's going to take focused efforts to remove those barriers and achieve racial equity. Higher ed has always faced a challenge to assure equity, but today's circumstances demand that we address it head on. In a world where the consequences of not having a post-secondary skill or education are increasing, the fact that millions are denied meaningful opportunities to obtain them because of their race, nationality, or other circumstances of their birth is unacceptable. But it's not enough to say we need more equitable outcomes from higher education. We have to think seriously about equity and what it will take for higher education to assure everyone the opportunity they need and deserve. This is even more important today during this global pandemic. Higher education should be viewed as central to the economic recovery and moving beyond where we are. This current crisis, reinforced by the pandemic, has created a unique moment where institutions and systems are rapidly adapting practices to better serve students. My colleague Jamil Sami will discuss some of these in just a moment. Significant additional reforms will be necessary to address the barriers created by the pandemic, as well as those that existed before. In order to accelerate progress, we must focus efforts on people whom colleges, universities, and other education and training providers have served poorly or not at all. While attention is largely on the present moment, changes made now can have significant lasting effects. If we want those changes to be positive and to ensure all students' success, especially low income and students of color, then we need changes that are not just temporary band-aids, but are sustained efforts that are equity-minded and ensure no more students are left behind. I believe we have a unique opportunity to make this happen, but we will all, across borders and oceans, need to work together to come up with sustainable solutions, get them into policy and implement it at scale to ensure that in the future, no one is left behind. I'm excited to begin these discussions in the US. I know many of these discussions have already happened today across the world. But for our session this afternoon, this morning, this evening, wherever the time zone is for you, we're going to first take a global look at the practices and policies, and then open it up to an esteemed panel for a discussion on practices and policies that they have put in action. First, I'd like to introduce Jamil Sami. Jamil calls himself a student of higher education worldwide, but I'm sure most of us consider ourselves students of Jamil's. Jamil worked with the World Bank for 25 years as the person responsible for higher education strategy. He now works as an independent consultant with governments, universities, foundations, and donor agencies. I've had the privilege of working with Jamil for a couple years and feel much better for it. Jamil is going to discuss a new report on COVID's lessons for higher education. The executive summary of the report can be found on luminafoundation.org, and the full report will be coming out in the next couple weeks. With that, I'll turn it over to Jamil.
Thank you very much, Courtney, for your kind introduction. A very good afternoon, evening, and morning to all of you. It's a great privilege to be part of this Wahed event. I'm going to show you my PowerPoint, so let me figure out, put it on the screen. Can you all see it, Courtney?
We can see it, but it is not in presentation mode. There you go. Perfect.
Well, maybe we should start with a prayer. Dear God, could you please uninstall and install again 2020 because it has a virus? 10 years ago, a friend of mine from the US was hired to teach at a university in Singapore. And he tells me that he had a very unusual experience because in addition to giving him the magnetic key to enter the key to his office, he was also given a thermometer. And perhaps most importantly for today's situation, he was forced to learn to teach online 10 years ago. 8 years ago, the president of Stanford University, Professor Hennessy, talked about a tsunami threatening higher education. But even though he lives in California, he was not talking about big water mass. He was talking about universities in the digital era. But I'm not sure that many people listened to him. And we had to experience COVID-19 to live with this digital tsunami, because from one day to the other, We saw sadly students, faculty members, and administrators contaminated with the virus, some of them dying. Universities closing down within a few days. No more classes, research, exams on campus. Students without income and place to live. No more international mobility and conferences. And already within a few weeks of the pandemic, some universities started firing some of their professors or administrators. To share with you the results of the study I've been doing on behalf of the Lumina Foundation over the past few months, I have divided my presentation into 4 parts. What has been the impact of COVID-19 on colleges and universities worldwide? What are some of the mitigating policies that we can observe at the national level? How have institutions themselves dealt with this extraordinary situation? And I would finish with a few words about university leadership in this context. I'm nostalgic about the old days, which were just 8 months ago, but still seem so far away. This is our new normal in many parts of the world. And ironically, what was initiative for a few innovative professors, often looked upon as eccentric by their colleagues, online education has become mainstream. But the switch to online education has not been easy. There are some fundamental requirements not all institutions all over the world are able to meet. Proper connection to the internet, having a good learning and management system. Many universities have that, but very few professors use them. Having digital content to share with your students, instructors who are familiar with online education and comfortable, students who are ready. The fact that you are adept at using Facebook or other social media doesn't mean that you may necessarily be prepared to learn online, and alignment of assessments, having methods that are aligned with the new mode of education. Now, one of the things I see is that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was this myth of the great equalizer. After all, the virus doesn't discriminate. It goes to rich countries, poor countries, big countries, small countries. But in fact, we do know that in the population groups are not affected equally. And we've seen in the US that Blacks and Latinos have been affected more than other groups. In Europe, migrant workers and their families have been affected more. And the same is applying to education in terms of financial resources. We see students that lose their income because they were working to pay for their studies. They lose the place where they stay. Some of them were not able to go back home, especially international students, and are having a dire situation. Access to the internet, readiness to study online. And we can say without any hesitation that after 8 or 9 months of online education, for many students, the risk of failure has increased, and emotional distress the levels are very high, as some surveys have shown already in both the US and other countries, for example, South Africa. And this has made us aware, as Courtney mentioned in her introduction, that structural problems that had not been addressed are impacting on our ability to react to the pandemic. I've already mentioned limited resources, no adequate access to internet. Even in the US, even in the industrial countries, we see huge inequalities. And for many students, being able to pay for the fees for internet, even if they have internet access, is a challenge. And even if you have access to internet at home, you may have to share it with your parents if they are teleworking, or with your siblings if they're also studying online. And statistics from many countries show that these gaps are very huge. In Brazil, for example, 17% of the students did not have proper internet access when the pandemic started. In Chile, 25%. In many sub-Saharan African countries, more than half the students do not have proper access to the internet. In fact, many professors themselves face the same problem, not having a computer or not having internet access. And then for the institutions themselves, inadequate digital infrastructure in many cases. And the reality is sometimes very, very difficult, complicated. My last professional trip before the pandemic in February took me to two African countries, first Sudan and then Nigeria. And in both countries, the main issue was not internet access, it was access to electricity supply, let alone internet. The pandemic has showed us that many institutions throughout the world have a precarious funding model, the expensive campus-based model, over-reliance on private funding from tuition fees, or in the case of private institutions, that's their main source of income, over-reliance on international students in Australia, UK, US, Canada, etc. In countries like the US, where the student loans are such a significant part of funding for the students, when these loans are structured as mortgage type loans instead of income contingent, then when there is a big, not only health crisis, but economic crisis, the impact is terrible. And I want to illustrate with a few pictures what I have just described. This is a picture from the US. Two college girls, they were in the same college, Haverford College. Isabel on the left and Tatiana on the right. When the pandemic hits and they have to go back home, while they had similar conditions when they were on college campus, and see the difference. Look at the fancy house on the left and the food truck on the right, where Tatiana is now working to help her parents. Do you think they will have the same education experience during the pandemic? Undoubtedly not. This is a picture from Colombia, where I live. This girl from an indigenous group has borrowed her mom's cellular phone and is trying to get connection to follow her classes. Or look at this girl in Chile, has to climb on the roof to be able to try to get internet connection. Some of you may remember this picture from the past in the US. George McLaurin was a Black student who had to fight his way all the way to the Supreme Court to be able to get enrolled at University of Oklahoma. Even though he was enrolled reluctantly, they put him in this corner, in this cupboard, and that's where he took the classes. Not equal, but this situation, it may not be as stark today, but it's still perduring. If we look, for example, at the cost of in-state tuition in Oklahoma today, we will see that it represents only 26% of the average income of a white family, but it still represents 41% of a Black family. And everywhere the cost of education will be bigger for students from low-income families or from minority groups. And then the burden of student debts that is affecting students in the US and many other countries. And then one thing that we could observe during the pandemic is that males and females have not been affected in the same way, and that for female students and academics, the burden has been much greater because the distribution of labor within the household is not equitable, and many women students or professors have been struggling more than their male counterparts under the pandemic. And then the rising levels of emotional distress that is affecting students, struggling to keep up with the pace of studies online, struggling because one of their family members may have died because of COVID, or their parents may have lost their job. And that's one thing that many universities have signaled the importance of the great demand on psychological services to support students that are depressed, who are facing anxiety and increased stress. And sometimes it can lead to tragic consequences. A few months ago in the Indian state of Kerala, during an online exam, a female student saw her internet fall down and she was so distressed that she took her life right after the exam. Now, how have governments reacted? At the national level, I see four kinds of reactions. Increased financial aid, of course, usually that takes place in the richer countries, trying to target students who lost their income. Support for increased broadband capacity. We've seen that in many African countries, Asian countries, Latin American countries. Capacity building for online teaching. Ghana and Kenya, very soon after the beginning of the pandemic, has struck an agreement with the UK online university to help them build capacity among all the professors. And in many countries, the QA agency, accreditation board, etc., have tried to flexibilize their regulations, have given blanket authorization to teach online where this was not allowed. Ironically, until 2 years ago in South Africa, for example, universities were not allowed to teach online. It was a monopoly of UNISA, the distance education university. It's only with the social movements and now with the pandemic that the authorization was given. In Canada and the US, there was a moratorium on the repayment of student loans to help students, and that makes it even more urgent to move to income contingent loans, which is the approach that Australia and New Zealand have followed and for many years, and more recently England. At the institutional level, and I'm sure we'll hear more from the other panelists members, universities and colleges have also provided additional emergency financial aid to their students. In some cases, they have donated or loaned laptops so that the students who didn't have equipment could follow the classes, help with internet plans, either free or subsidized, flexibility in assessment, moving away from grades towards giving either a pass or fail in many cases. And as I mentioned earlier, providing academic and psychological support. Just to give you one example from Brazil, Campinas is a public university in Unicamp, and they were the university president was the first in Brazil to make the difficult decision to close the university and move online in a country where the leadership has downplayed the importance of the pandemic. And he was very much criticized by the other university presidents. Mind you, within a week, everybody had closed down also the campus. They donated computers, laptops, they gave emergency scholarships to 2,000 students. Because they have a medical faculty, they played a very important role trying to attend to COVID-19 patients, opening up a phone hotline to provide medical advice to general public because the government was missing in action. And I'm sure that resonates for those of you who are from the US. And the big challenge has been to maintain quality under these new circumstances. And I think that COVID has provided the opportunity for many of the institutions to revisit the education model and think hard about admission criteria. In the US, some universities have dropped the SAT requirements, for example, which is good news from an equity point of view, because we all know that it was socially biased. Many people are challenging now the old traditional lectures. Is it at all relevant? The high-stake exams, moving from summative to formative evaluation, some universities and colleges offering open book or open internet exams, revisiting the traditional schedule of semester-based and yearly model that is very rigid, moving to flexible models, blended just in time, offering multiple qualifications. Stanford just a few years ago had offer the open loop approach where students could move in and out based on their own career schedule and plans. And also thinking about a new business model. One of the survey done by the International Association of University Presidents found out that 67% of their members recognized that they were not prepared for such an emergency. So bringing in contingency planning as part of your strategic planning is important. Income diversification, pooling of resources and services. There is so much duplication across institutions. And we have interesting initiatives to pool library resources, scientific equipment, services, etc. And rethinking the price of your that is charged to students. And I'm very happy that we have a member from Southern New Hampshire University, because they have announced that from now on that they will reduce their tuition fees by 65%, if I'm not mistaken, as a new model that they will offer their students. And lastly, I want to say a few words about leadership. And usually I don't mix politics and my higher education presentation, but I would like to show the picture of two leaders, one of whom has been re-elected in a landslide. The second is, you know better than me, that it's not been so successful in the US in terms of re-election. But I think the main point is that I think in both countries, the way the leadership has dealt with coronavirus, the pandemic, has been very determinant in terms of election outcomes. When we look at university leadership, leading people effectively means that you offer a transformational vision with stretch goals, that you inspire your academic community, that you empower them, that you think about consequences, and perhaps more importantly today is that you care about people. The university and college presidents have had to face important decisions under the pandemic. First, as I mentioned, in the case of Brazil, to close campus, and in some kind of cases, they have refused to do that or refused to move online, like UBA, which is the main public university in Argentina, where they said, no, we cannot offer quality education online. So they just closed down. National University of Science and Technology Zimbabwe, same thing. In Malaysia, the Ministry of Higher Education didn't want to move to virtual education. Then how to maintain operational continuity, how to reopen or not reopen in fall to 2020. Personally, I believe that in many cases in the US, in the UK, in some European countries, university presidents have not been reasonable. They have played with the health of their community, sometimes under political pressure, sometimes under economic pressure. How do you care for the most vulnerable members of your community? Do you have the courage, the vision to embrace a new education model and a new economic model that will make you more resilient? I see that the most successful leaders have been those who had open and honest communication about what they knew, what they didn't know, that took feedback to make corrective actions, that were able to delegate to the community. And we've seen a surge of great initiatives among professors, faculty members who didn't speak across department walls, institutions that used to compete, working together, risk planning, flexibility, and caring for the entire university community. In conclusion, you may remember at the end of the Cold War, when the Iron Curtain fell down in Europe, some policy analysts coined this term, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, to describe the new worlds after the end of the Cold War. I think this term applies even more to the situation that we have experienced with the pandemic, where everything is volatile, uncertain, much more complex, and we have to live with ambiguity on a daily basis. I believe that this picture summarizes better than many words what happened throughout 2020. We started on the left with a plan for a normal semester, and slowly we moved to remote teaching. And what actually happened, I think, is well captured by this picture. And now the question before us is, what is the plan for the post-COVID-19 era? And I think if I can summarize with 2 words what has happened. On the negative side, COVID has been an amplifier of inequality, of disparities, as Courtney mentioned in her introduction. But on the positive side, I think it has also been an accelerator of innovative practices. And hopefully we can build on these positive initiatives and incorporate them in the priorities for the future. And I will finish here. First priority, how to keep the university community safe, how to empower the university community and lead in a collaborative and participatory manner, and how do you build resilience and equity, that should be your priority for the future, through a new education model, through a new business model, by incorporating risk analysis and contingency planning. And I think that this picture illustrates the various approaches: the exclusion on the left, integration, which is not been sufficient. We really want to have inclusive higher education, inclusive colleges, and universities that are safe for all and that really put emphasis on offering equal opportunities to members of all communities, all groups, and the traditionally underrepresented groups. I'll finish here, and please be safe, all of you. Over to you, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Jamil, for that very comprehensive look at the impact that COVID has had, and some challenges we face, but a bit of optimism too. So what we're going to do now is bring it back to our panel. And so we have individuals from, as Jamil mentioned, Southern New Hampshire University, from Mitchell Technical College, and from University of California at Berkeley. And so what I'm going to do is introduce each of them and ask them to introduce themselves and their institution. And then afterwards, we'll bring it back to a panel with the 3 of them, as well as Jamil, to talk about some of these issues and what we're actually seeing on the ground at these institutions and what the next steps are. So I'm going to first start with Jada Hebra. In 2016, Jada became the first Vice President and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Southern New Hampshire University. Prior, Jada spent 25 years working in the secondary school sector, designing and supporting diversity and inclusion initiatives, while also serving in a variety of roles such as humanities teacher, associate dean of students, director of college advising, director of admission, dean of faculty, and assistant head of school. Jada certainly brings an incredible amount of experience and perspective to these issues. So Jada, with that, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about Southern New Hampshire University.
Thank you so much. Really glad to be here. Very important topic, and that was a wonderful intro, Courtney, for the whole program, but Jamil's overview was really sobering and telling, so thank you. So an overview of SNHU, if you're not familiar with Southern New Hampshire University, we are an 88-year-old private nonprofit university enrolling over 163,000 active learners from 3 locations. So we have a bricks and mortar campus that we call University Campus, and that sits in Manchester, New Hampshire. That serves about 3,000 undergrads. And then the online campus, which we call the Global Campus, that operates out of 2 locations, one out of an old mill yard in Manchester, New Hampshire, and another location in downtown Tucson, Arizona. We have always served the quote unquote, non-traditional student by offering flexible and accessible credentials. At our founding in 1932, we served adults and working adults and offered off-site courses for active duty military folks. And then in 1995, we launched the College for Online Learning, for Online and Continued Education, which is our online program, really to reach what we say, students for whom a degree is not guaranteed. So today we continue to be working with working adults, many women, military and military affiliated, as well as low-income students, racialized minorities, refugees in 5 countries, and opportunity youth in some major cities. Opportunity youth are defined as really young men of color between 16 and 24 who are neither engaged in education or employment. So, in a nutshell, SNU serves really 55% women and 30% racialized minority groups. So 85% of our learners are either women or racialized minorities or both. So our strategic plan is entitled the Social Mobility and Opportunity Agenda. So it really is our mission to meet the needs of underserved learners. And we've always been affordable or low cost, but to Jamil's point about reducing the cost by 65%, the goal is really to have a $10,000 price point for tuition particularly for our bricks and mortar campus, because that's the business model that is the most expensive. Our current status, we definitely had to quickly pivot for campus when COVID hit, but it was pretty much business as usual for the online program, because that is what we've been set up to do for a long time. So that's us, Southern New Hampshire University.
Thank you so much. Next, I'll have Dr. Carol Grody-Hanks give an introduction. So Carol is the Vice President of Academics of Mitchell Technical College. She's been with the college for 16 years, and in this role has the opportunity to work with faculty, staff, and students. And as Carol says, although COVID has brought challenges to the traditional college classroom, it's also brought forward opportunities for new learning strategies, innovative content delivery, and creative assessment strategies. Carol, tell us a little bit about Mitchell Technical College.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to learn and share with each of you today. I would like to introduce you to Mitchell Technical College, which is located in America's heartland in Mitchell, South Dakota. We have been providing high quality Associate of Applied Science degrees and diplomas in 30 program areas since 1968. And while our student population, which is roughly 1,200, is predominantly traditional, we also serve students who are older learners, economically underserved, Native American, Karen, and single parents. We offer a few fully online programs, but our commitment, focus, and passion truly is the delivery of hands-on technical education. Mitchell Technical College knows that our students choose us because they enjoy tactile work, so all of our on-campus programs focus on lab and realistic technologies rather than solely lecture-based learning. Our faculty work closely with our industry partners to ensure that wherever possible, the students are working with the materials and equipment that are equivalent to what is being used out in industry. Each of our programs has a clearly prescribed path to graduation, which is often a little different than our four-year counterparts. And we also have clearly defined curriculum, which allows students to obtain those stackable skills that allow them to take their careers into a unique direction. Our graduation rate is 73%, and the Brookings Institution has ranked Mitchell Technical College as #1 in the nation for middle class and bottom to top economic mobility. Our career placement rate has been 99% for as long as I can remember, and the average starting wage for our graduates is $19.40 an hour. So all of our institutional efforts have been proven over time that the biggest reason we are successful is that our faculty and our staff are very good at acknowledging each student as a unique individual. And we are here to help them succeed and utilize a proactive approach, which includes a robust LMS system and a student alert system. We opened our Center for Student Success in 2016 and was immediately recorded an increase in the number of students that had early alerts submitted by faculty and staff. In 2018-19, over 2,000 alerts were submitted and processed by our student success coaches, which was more than doubled than just 2 years prior to that. So those alerts really meant that 331 students received additional counseling and assistance in that 1 year alone. Also proving effective for our retention and graduation rates is our process for assisting programs that have underperforming metrics. So based on our program retention rates that are calculated each fall, the Dean of Student Success meets with the program faculty to develop a customized plan for assisting students to achieve success in their program. So together they examine all of the student outcome data, the courses, the student schedules, the satisfaction surveys, and instructional practices in that program to determine the barriers and strategies to narrow those gaps. 44% of our full-time first-time students are Pell Grant eligible, showing that they come from low-income households. And we recently signed an agreement with Cengage Unlimited to offer textbooks and resources at a much reduced cost for the students. They pay a one-time fee for unlimited access to course materials and study tools for all of their coursework while they're here at Mitchell Tech. This institution-wide effort encourages our faculty to review Cengage materials and adopt it if it meets the needs of the program and the student. Other services that are in place assist the students with their quest to stay in school include a food pantry, our emergency fund, and on-campus counseling. So Mitchell Tech's success is built on two pillars. First, a clear understanding of and focus by all of our employees on our mission, which is to provide skills for success in technical careers. Second is our culture of caring, which is embraced by all of our leaders, faculty, and staff who genuinely care for each other and our students, and strive to make sure that we have excellence in our technical education. And this culture guides every Mitchell Tech employee's actions and decisions towards success of our students. And it is with the same commitment and passion that we developed our Return to Campus, Remain on Campus plan to help mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and keep our students safe. Our plan focused on 4 areas: healthy behaviors, healthy environments, healthy operations, and a proactive approach to our active cases. For our healthy behaviors, we implemented a safely daily checklist. We mandated masks, social distancing. We put all of our classrooms at 50% capacity, and we installed many hand washing and sanitizing stations throughout campus. Our healthy environment included an increased air circulation and air exchange to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we increased our filter replacement policy from quarterly to monthly. Plexiglass shields were also installed in classrooms and various campus centers across the campus. And our food service went to all to-go operations. Our healthy operations part was our COVID planning team meets weekly. And then we also have a daily Teams site that we refer to continually. And then our coronavirus dashboard on our website. We limit our campus visits to outside groups, and our communications to employees and our students is consistent. With our proactive approach, we asked every program director to come up with an ABC plan. What would they do if we had to go remote again? What would they do if students were ill? And what would they do if they were ill? We have Teams training. We've been utilizing Microsoft Teams like crazy, trying to eat up all of the information we can. And we have a great employee and student follow-up system for COVID cases. We have experienced a spike in our numbers just this past week, and we currently have 63 student recovered cases, which is about 5% of our enrollment. And there has not been one positive case linked back to campus. So we believe our efforts have been very successful. So South Dakota is home to Mount Rushmore, and Mitchell is home to the world's only Corn Palace. So if you are ever in the Heartland, please stop by and tour our campus, and you might just find the career you've always dreamed of.
Thank you so much, Carol. I will have to look into the Corn Palace. Did not know that. So finally, I'd like to introduce Julian Ledesma. He is at University of California at Berkeley, and he serves as the Executive Director of the Centers for Educational Equity and Excellence, CE3. It's a cluster of multiple programs that specialize in serving the more than 13,000 non-traditional and historically marginalized students at UC Berkeley. With over 20 years of service to the University of California, Julian also serves as Region 9 Chair of, and I may not pronounce this right, NACADA, the Global Community for Academic Advising. So with that, Julian, tell us a little bit about UC Berkeley.
Well, thank you. And again, I just want to share, just so great to be here with you all today, hearing what the other panelists have shared already. And Jamil, I think, just setting us up beautifully for our discussion today, with many of the challenges that you identified, some of them new and some of them in those challenges that have just become, the pandemic has just kind of heightened the gaps for our students, particularly in my experience here at Berkeley. So if you're familiar with Berkeley, you know it's a large public university, a research university with 43,000 students. 3/4 of our students are undergraduates. UC Berkeley was the first of 10 University of California campuses, and it was established in 1868. Over the years, UC's mission has continued to be articulated, but at its core, it remains an institution focused on education, research, and public service. Some of you may also be familiar with UC Berkeley as being very competitive. Only 17% of our eligible applicants are admitted. Right now, our estimated undergraduate annual cost of attendance is roughly $40,000 a year. About 25% of our undergraduates are first-generation college students. Nearly a third are low-income students. They're Pell eligible. 20% of our students are underrepresented, Chicano, Latino, African-American, or Native American. And 22% of our undergraduates come to us as transfer students. My area, the Centers for Educational Equity and Excellence, CE3 for short, it's a cluster of comprehensive programs offering academic counseling, supplemental aid, and scholarships to support historically marginalized students at Berkeley. And this includes former foster youth, student veterans, student parents, undocumented students, and transfer students of all ages and life experiences. Our aim is to ensure that historically marginalized students achieve their full potential at the #1 public university in the world. Among our CE3 programs, we have the Educational Opportunity Program, the Transfer Student Center, our Undocumented Student Program, our Cal Veteran Services Center. We also have 2 Department of Education TRIO Student Support Services programs. And as CE3, we connect students in need with critical resources from holistic academic guidance, financial support, mentoring, to career preparation, basic needs, nutrition, and childcare support. And as was mentioned at Berkeley, more than 13,000 students identify with one or more of our programs. I think it's also important when you talk about what we do in UC Berkeley to note that I think our model of comprehensive support and our holistic approach is even more critical in the Bay Area of Northern California. If you're familiar with this area, you know it's one of the world's most expensive regions to live. Right now, Berkeley is operating almost exclusively in a remote environment. Less than 2,000 of our students are living in campus residence halls right now, down from the typical 8,500 or so. We don't have reliable data about folks living in the surrounding area in apartments and houses, but we know that those numbers are down as well. Right now, most courses are only available virtually, and nearly all available support services are also operating remotely. Our programs transitioned over in mid-March to primarily remote operation. We anticipate we're going to be in this status until at least the end of our academic year in May. There's, again, so many of the themes that Jamil started with, I think, are reflected in with our students and their experience. When you talk about technology, one of the big challenges is access to reliable technology, access to reliable internet. But even when you have a reliable technology, what is the home situation? We have many students where they're sharing a device among the family, or it's just not a environment conducive to learning. So they are participating in Zoom sessions or in courses with the family business happening, behind them. And so it's become one of our practices just to, when we connect with students one-on-one, to talk about, is it safe to share? Are you in a private setting, for example? We can't assume with these Zoom backgrounds that we have, we can't always assume that it is a secure private setting that many folks, really rely on to disclose many of the things that disclose in our work. And our work does include traditional academic guidance, but also personal counseling as well. And overall, I think, again, we're saying the same here. Students are just worn down, exhibiting higher levels of stress and anxiety. And I also think it's important to note that student service staff have felt that pain as well. And I know our student service staff has been operating near or beyond burnout levels for months.
Great, thank you so much. So with that, what we're going to do is open it up to the panel and have a discussion. I know that most of our audience will be watching at a later time, just given the global nature of this and that it's the middle of the night for many of the people, or late at night. But for those of you who are joining us live, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we will get to those throughout our discussion time. So first of all, I'd just like to open up a question to the panel. When I look at the news and other things, I see the fact that enrollment is down, and the fear is that enrollment is down, particularly for our most marginalized or underserved students. So I'd be interested to know, honestly, what is happening at your institutions? What are you seeing with regards to enrollment and student success, both when the pandemic hit and how that's evolved since then? Who would like to begin? Jada?
Am I unmuted? No. Okay. So, can you hear me? Okay, sorry. It says I'm muted. So we definitely, there was a drop both on campus and online initially, as students had to make important choices, about where school fit in their radically changing lives. And it has not rebounded as much on campus as it has online. The demographic ratios of the drops mirrored the ratios of our student body. So, we have, I don't know, 16% African American students, and it correlated about 16% of African American students dropped, and same across the demographic categories. So we didn't see a disproportionate increase in the percentage of drops for any one group numerically. However, obviously, that's a different story, but it has rebounded. They've come back. There have been some reintegration efforts to reach out to them, to give emergency funding and say, what can we do to help you come back or stay? So we've rebounded back to our previous levels, except on campus. Campus is still lower in terms of those vulnerable populations who got hit the hardest. Overall, on online, our enrollments are actually up. So I think what is happening with a lot of online businesses is happening at SNHU, is that you deliver an online service and people can go to it. And so our enrollments are actually up for now. So we'll see. And I'm cautiously optimistic about the outlook, but right now, and we're really trying to get those students back from campus who did not return. Yeah.
Julian or Carol?
I could jump in. For us, we're on a semester system, so we've experienced this kind of midway through our spring semester, our summer term, and now almost completing our fall term. And when we first went to the status, there were some students who, in kind of the middle of the semester, and given the disruption, the abrupt disruption, did choose to withdraw their enrollments in the spring. Nothing hugely significant at that time. There was bigger question marks moving into the summer. Summer enrollment actually went up for us, other than international students, which is an area that obviously decreased with so many of the factors going on. Summer enrollments did go up. I do think, though, one of the things, and part of the reason that happened, was this sense that students were playing catch up from what happened in the spring. Our campus decided to go to offer, all grades became pass, no pass in the spring. And so folks made a lot of decisions about whether to maintain their enrollments or the degree of how many enrollments they would like to continue to have. And so in the summer, there was a sense, well, we didn't do, again, the other thing, the unique feature about Berkeley, not unique, but certainly heightened, is it's an ultra competitive environment. So there's this sense that if I'm not, excelling, to the maximum possible, I am somehow behind. And so I think that drove summer enrollments. We did anticipate that fall might be where we really saw kind of the hit, but our enrollments have been pretty flat. We did not see a huge drop off in fall enrollments. Now we're only a couple of weeks away from the end of the fall semester, and already we're hearing from students. We anticipated that folks, after experiencing a full semester, may decide to take a different course of action in the spring. A lot of our students, again, given that they are low income, it's a value proposition to them. Is this the Berkeley that I am paying for, that I signed up for? And so some of those folks had signaled already this, I'll kind of wait and see, let me experience the semester, I might opt out. And we're seeing some of that for the spring, and we do anticipate a bit of a drop off for spring enrollment. The alarming thing is we're also hearing from students that they may not even complete this semester. There's some folks where, students do have an option to withdraw, to cancel enrollments up until the last day of the semester. And so that's something that it was a little alarming to hear anecdotally, so many students considering that option, and that's but we do anticipate, it's hard to really try to figure out the percentages, but we will be dropping in enrollments in the spring. I know that number I gave you earlier of 2,000 folks living in the residence halls, it'll be a challenge to maintain that number in the spring, is what we're hearing as well. Again, there's an anticipated drop off there as well. And then once we get beyond the spring, that's the real question for us as well.
I want to go to Carol next, but Julian, can I follow up on something you said about the potential for students dropping out now? What do you attribute that to? The high academic standards, mental health concerns, funding?
Well,
what?
I think, for us, it's, and I think this is a point that, Jamil was shared with us at the beginning of this presentation is, our starting place was already, equity gaps that existed. Programs like ours exist because of these equity gaps. And so Berkeley is already a place where it is highly competitive. It's a pressure cooker. You have folks coming from all different types of life experiences and backgrounds, and we exist to help mitigate some of those gaps, to fill in kind of the college going capital that's not there for our first generation students. And I think that what students are experiencing and deciding to potentially opt out is, this is not what I signed up for. The other thing we're seeing, by the way, is in the economy of what students are choosing to engage in, they are focusing on academics, whether that's course enrollments and working directly with instructors. And there's less of a focus on engaging in student support services like ours or traditional advising. And so that mix of further disengagement, further isolation, I think students, for the most part, are deciding that this is not the experience they signed up for, but also this is not representative of their best work. And there's a concern that they're putting on record, right, on the transcript, something that will follow them, whether it comes to applying for a graduate or professional program, pursuing an internship. And so folks are deciding this is not, they'd rather opt out of that. And other folks, it's simply everything else that's come with the pandemic. You can't separate, obviously, their personal lives with their academic careers. And so folks who are now all of a sudden, and some of this may be a change, some of this may be just kind of status quo, the main earners in their family, or more reliance from family to navigate whatever the familiar circumstances are, being a caretaker to little brothers, little sisters, or sons and daughters. So those things, there are ways to mitigate that when we're in normal status. That's what our programs exist for. We have support engagement, but in this remote status, folks are much more isolated from those robust services, and it just makes things a lot harder.
Carol, how about you?
Yeah, I mirror a lot of what both Jada and Julian said too here in Mitchell Tech. We finished the spring semester on target. We took an extra week at spring break, got all of our faculty up to speed as best we could, on the new technologies to allow the online learning for the rest of the spring semester. And our student success coaches were on hand, our IT department was on hand, our academic support people, everybody just poured into that success. So we did finish our semester as scheduled, with full grades, and not very many students withdrew. We did survey our students at the end of the semester, and they indicated if they had to come back in an online environment that they would not be coming back. So we really were struggling with how we were going to start our fall semester, and part of our COVID planning team then really focused on what do we need to do to get back to campus and then stay on campus? Because we know, since our students really like the hands-on learning environments, that if we went all online, we would lose a majority of our students. Even up to the day of first day of classes, we really weren't quite sure if we were going to maintain our enrollment, which we did. We're pretty flat. We were up maybe 20 students. And so our admissions team had changed all of their recruiting techniques and things to do to keep the students here. But a lot of our students are appreciative of the economic impact that we've worked with to try to make school more affordable for them. But we too, like Julian, are experiencing some students that are trying to maybe withdraw because they just either financially can't afford it, or the home life with their kids at home or their brothers and sisters at home. It's just a whole new dynamic that we just don't have the ability to take care of for them like we could when they had jobs and they were coming to school and their younger siblings or their children were in school. So some of those things are really, really tough to deal with, and the financial strain that some of our students are facing due to loss of employment, and then just the mental health issues as well, with the fear of the unknown. We're dealing with all of that as well.
Thank you. One of the things I love about this panel is that you are such diverse institutions serving a very different student populations, from geographically very different, but you are facing some of the same challenges and seeing some of the same things in your students. I'm interested to know what sort of emergency practices or policies. Some of you mentioned them kind of in your intro, but what sort of things are you enacting to help, especially those students who are most vulnerable to not enroll, or to, as you're talking about, to leave mid-semester and not re-enroll coming into the spring? What sort of things are you undertaking?
I think for us, it's, kind of trying to, one of the first things that we did as CE3 was an anonymous survey of students. And just to say, I think, the university, we've had several kind of institutional pulse surveys. We have, data from our university health services and services that are provided by our staff psychologists and that sort of thing. But, we wanted to hear directly from students and create both the opportunity to get that feedback, but also for them to have an outlet just in terms of their voice. And so I think that kind of set up where we were going. And early on, what was striking was, I just think of some of the comments. I remember one student just in bold writing, "This is literally life-threatening." This was like in March. But it spoke to, some folks, not taking this as seriously as it was. And I think from that point, really trying to operate what is within our control, what can we do? One of the things that we did internally was obviously move everything to remote operations. Initially was simply one-on-one Zooms. What we then began, there's a big feature of our work is creating an opportunity for group support, peer support, community space, a space where folks can feel like they belong. And that was missing when we don't have the physical environment. So it's not, obviously a perfect replacement, but one of the things that we developed quickly were virtual front desks. So trying to recreate the sense of tiered interactions, interventions, but also a place where folks can just see a group of people, not just one-on-one. And that seemed to be effective, and we replicated that across programs. The other thing we moved is we work, very closely in partnership with several other units on campus, our financial aid office, our multicultural student development, our academic colleges. And so one of the things that we did internally was, once this started, being prolonged and you realize how severe it was going to be, taking a look at where we have flexibility in the budget. Let me also say that overall, and this has been a lot of, this is the product of a lot of hard work and planning, my area is fairly financially healthy. So we were able to do what I'm about to share, but other folks I know on campus and our partners have really been hit by the drop in enrollment, how that's impacted budget. But for us, one of the things we said is all this programming, our admissions yield events, our community events, our in-person workshops, it's our model to provide food as much as possible, as well as something to mitigate the need for additional food, supplemental nutrition. So there were a bunch of things we knew we weren't going to do. So we took all that funding, we worked with our campus partners, and as a campus, there was an emergency fund developed. So folks low-income students could apply, actually any student, but low-income students had a higher threshold of support for emergency funding due to COVID-related expenses. The other thing, we worked campus to roll out a emergency technology program that provided laptops and hotspots for folks. So for us, it was, and other symbolic things. We put together a community video, just sharing with students that we're in this together, and to showcase the teamwork and the collaboration across campus. So there were both the things to kind of signal the socio, mental, emotional impact, but also really tangible things to address some of the challenges the students are experiencing. Obviously, the ongoing challenge is you can only go to that well so many times, right? The resources are finite, and we're enduring in this remote pandemic status right now.
Thank you. Jada, both you and Jamil mentioned some things that you're doing at Southern New Hampshire University with regards to tuition. I'm interested in any other sort of emergency measures that you may have taken.
Yeah, it's so interesting because of our different modalities. A lot of the things that Julian is talking about, were occurring on our campus, the bricks and mortar place-based, where pivot, rush, students were just really not sure what to do, and they needed a lot of support. And we had phone trees to reach out to, individuals to check in on them, laptop loaners, emergency funding. So the emergency response to campus, I really revealed the gaps in what we weren't doing on campus, but online. Our online advisors and our online students have dealt with these issues all along. Food insecurity, housing insecurity, domestic violence, or housing, not being safe at home. And so we already had things in place in the online program. We had emergency funding. Advisors were already empowered to give up to $1,000 for emergency funds to their students. And so it really, for online, it was about upping our game. And on campus, it was really about starting, really initiating some things that needed to be in place before. But I think the biggest thing is money. We just sort of said we need to infuse money into whether it's emergency funds to respond to people's needs. In addition to the CARES Act, there were millions of dollars poured into emergency funds, and turning them around pretty quickly was really important, so that people didn't have to perform their poverty, or it was just like, here's the money. We went completely online in the fall. That decision was made early. We said we're not going back in the fall period, and got a lot of flack for it, but dropped tuition for everybody to $10,000. We did allow for housing insecure folks to come back to campus, and we spread them out across the dorms. Let's see, things like on camp online, we conducted training for over 700 advisors on trauma-informed, culturally responsive advising, just so that our online folks could understand what some of the folks that they're dealing with and supporting were going through, and how to react. One big thing we did was we launched a $5 million social justice fund. And in addition to the emergency funding for the immediate needs of our students, this fund is supporting 5 pilots to test and learn what interventions might drive up persistence and completion for our most underserved learners. And so those pilots are underway right now. We're looking at, digital bundle program, hybrid advising, a finish line, getting people who are 15 credits away from completing, but they drop out because of financial or other life circumstances, getting them over the finish line, and then a program to really centralize all of our emergency funding so that we can track it, disperse it quickly, and measure the impact that it's having on success and persistence for our students. So that was pretty exciting. We're auditing some of our academic programs because there are barriers there, not only in the online modality, but again, upping our game. We do very well with assessing and delivery of program online, but are we doing what we can do to be as inclusive in our pedagogy and in our content, and equitable in terms of access to our academic program as we could? So we're looking at that. We invested millions of dollars in 5 Black and female-owned venture capital firms who support efforts around higher ed reform and equity. So lots of different things that we just sort of said, it comes down to money, really, like Julian said, and where you are going to strategically place your investment for the highest return. But those are some of the things that we did.
That's super. Jamil, I'm actually interested from you. I think those are incredible examples of some things that are happening in the US. And I know you speak to some of those in your report. Anything else that really stuck out to you from what some institutions are doing, some of these emergency policies or practices that they're implementing?
Just a few points after listening to our panelists. I think there is a big difference between the situation in North America and in many other countries in the world. You've described that you had services in place. You have first student services to address economic needs, etc., or psychological support. And then what I've seen is that institutions that had a strong teaching and learning service department, it was much easier for them to make the transition to online education, even if only a small percentage of academics or faculty members were familiar with online education. At least there was a core group of people who could help them. And then I think it was Julian who mentioned this issue of feedback, the ability institutions that were able to very quickly take the pulse of both academics and students to try to identify immediate needs were much better prepared to respond. So I think these are some elements of resilience that unfortunately many institutions in other parts of the world do not have. So these are some of the points I think I wanted to take from what the panelists. I think the range of intervention that they have covered is pretty much what I've seen also elsewhere.
Thank you. Carol, I'd like to turn to you. I mean, you mentioned a few things that Mitchell Tech has done over the last few months to help your students. How do you think these things, or will they stick? How do you make sure that they are sustained and they continue to help those students who most need them moving forward?
Sure. Well, the biggest advantage that we found was using the Microsoft Teams network for all of our students, whether they're here on campus or our few online students that we have. And everybody's really embraced that technology really well and are going to continue using that to record lessons. They didn't realize how easy it was to just push record, and they could just upload those into their Teams classrooms. So actually it's done automatically for them in their Teams classroom. So students will never miss a class again, which is very, very helpful. Also, the Student Success Center is utilizing the Teams network also for one-on-one assistance, one-on-one counseling, advising sessions, registrations, all of that. So they still get that personal attention, even though that they might not be on campus. So that's been really helpful for our students. We also saw an increase in anxiety and depression with some of our students. And so we partnered with our Better Choices, Better Health community partners and offered free training and resources via Teams. And then all of our in-service trainings as well. We brought in some mental health experts working with things that the faculty can identify as a risk student. So that's been very helpful. We'll keep all of those resources after the pandemic too.
Super. Julian and Jada, you both mentioned money. It's all about money and doing, you had some money from the CARES Act and other things to get some of these things going. How or if or can these actually be sustained and stick to help students? This isn't, the pandemic kind of brought to light some of these issues, but they were certainly there before the pandemic. We're just way more aware of them right now. And so I'd love to hear, how do we keep them going?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think that, equity work costs money, and it's there. It needs an upfront investment, but the return on that investment, these programs will pay for themselves if they're done well. And so, if people stay, and attrition costs a lot of money, dropout costs a lot of money. So if you can push up persistence, your return on those dollars will come over time. But the upfront investment is not small, or it can be incremental, but you do have to invest upfront. And where you get that money, where you take it from, whether that will vary from institution to institution. But to act like what we actually really need to do to help these students come to us and stay with us is not going to cost money is really an illusion. And I think once people understand that, but then go down the line and say, but this is going to come back to us in a return, and painting that picture for people, particularly your CFO, is really important.
Thanks. Julian, would you add anything? I know one of the questions in the chat was about how do you make these policies work, these equity policies. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that for me, it goes back to kind of our starting place, and the status that we started from is, to do equity work in higher ed. And I completely agree with everything that Jada just said. But we're asked to do this work. We're asked to run lean and super thin. And so there's no opportunity to have a rainy day fund or just to plan for the future. And it is something that my area, I've been on campus for a while, and again, it tends to be the programs that focus on equity, that focus on serving underrepresented students, low-income students, that seem to be more a luxury to have in moments where budget gets tight. And so we've been through that before. So one of the things we did was in some ways, not knowing this moment was going to happen, but knowing that we needed a plan for some uncertainty. The difference between our budget model internally in CE3 as compared to 10 years ago is 10 years ago, we were 95% state or campus support. Now that number is 45%. So we really assertively, proactively went after and pursued federal grants. We've had tons of success with philanthropy. Students themselves put a measure on the ballot where a portion of their student service fee now helps fund our area. So we really kind of diversified our revenue, and that's really paying off right now. We didn't anticipate that, but that's one of the things that keeps us stable and relatively healthy. Our challenge is going to be right now in the current environment, this, kind of 1 year hit on operations and revenue. It's going to take us 3 years as a campus to dig out of that hole. If we go into next year, that hole is obviously going to be bigger. So how long will it take? Already on our campus, we're looking at a potential furlough. We're expanding our curtailment for the holiday break. There was an incentivized retirement program that some folks opted into, all as cost-cutting measures. So, the impact, I think, is real. The opportunity that it's created is, different types of conversations with our donors and folks who provide philanthropic support. I think a different understanding of the needs of the moment, and in many ways, kind of the realization that this student support infrastructure is so valuable. So it's almost, it took this moment for folks to realize that this is what protects that investment that was talked about earlier, that it's not so much of our focus over the years has been scholarship dollars, and that's important. But, to have the investment to protect the investment of the scholarship dollars is equally important as well.
Thank you. What, in talking about the things that you've done, and Jada, to your very good point that this takes money, but it will pay off in, dividends if you invest. Are there any new policies that you're considering that would help more of your Black, Hispanic, Native American, low income, or adults both enroll and succeed at your institutions?
Well, I'm hoping that the outcomes of these pilots that we're running will inform operations and drive systemic change that will change policies, because we were hoping to show that they work, and we'll know that in the summer. But we're looking at, we're auditing our gen ed program, but we're also auditing our student financial services program, and starting with bad debt and backing up all the way through admissions and saying, what are the barriers? What did we do well and what didn't we do well along this pathway? Because there are so many barriers in the SFS system. And what can we do? And I'm hoping that audit will yield some great insights, not only to change our policy, but to lobby for changes at the state and federal levels even, because the barriers there are so thick. So I'm hoping that we can change some policies there within things that we can control at SNHU to change, to make things easier, and hopefully maybe impact policy elsewhere too.
Carol or Julian?
I'd say we don't have necessarily any policy changes that we're looking at, but we do know that we need to take a deeper dive into the statistics, kind of like Jada said, and walk it backwards a little bit after the school year is over. Our probably most pressing equity challenge right now is our gap in graduation rates between Native American students and our overall student body. But like Jada, we need to walk that backwards now and figure out what it is specifically that we need to change. We actively recruit Native American students to come to campus, but then once they get here, they don't necessarily succeed. And we've had a diversity coach, we've had a diversity club, we've had different ceremonies, which are not participated in very well. So we're still trying to figure out what it is that we can do to narrow that gap, but we have to have some sort of services to assist those students in their successful quest of education. And we're just kind of floundering around right now trying to figure that out as well. We asked the students on an exit survey as to why they didn't take advantage of like the diversity club, didn't come to the meetings. And really it was just lack of interest or their job responsibilities is the two major reasons we got for that. So a lot more deeper dive we need to take.
Yeah, and for us, I think, overall, I think there's building on existing efforts and really kind of trying to do more with some of the things that kind of were already in process pre-pandemic. So one of the examples for us here on this campus is a couple of years ago, we launched African American Initiative. So, Berkeley's hovered at 2.5–3% of our registered students, African-American students population. So that's obviously an area we want to improve. And so there was an African-American initiative that was established that provided access scholarships to new African-American admits as a way to incentivize and address the cost and expense of attending Berkeley. One of the things in my area contributed this year and developed was to match the scholarships now with dedicated programming and academic counseling. So we hope to scale that up and build that up. UC Berkeley's also made it a priority to become an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution. And so that's, I think, been an area where it's allowed us to kind of coordinate and collaborate in a larger vision of a more a representative campus, particularly when you talk about California demographics. And so it's kind of an organizing point, a rallying point to get us to that place. We had high hopes that Proposition 16 here in California would pass, which would have allowed us to explore ways to restore affirmative action. Since that didn't happen, the emphasis really is on yielding the admits that we have, which is much more difficult to do in a remote environment. So I think, overall, we've been put in this kind of test, kind of forced to be in this laboratory of pilots and tests. But I think there's a lot that's going to come from that in terms of already collaborations that we're seeing and some things that we've just been forced to operate differently. And maybe those kind of the things that stick aren't necessarily as known yet, but definitely in the works.
Jamil, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because I'm going to ask you about some previous work. But for those of you who aren't aware, Jamil also did a couple reports for Wahed over the last couple of years on different practices and policies to ensure equity from across the globe, and took a deeper dive look into some of those that had some glimmers of hope. Jamil, what other kind of practices or policies have you seen across the globe that could help provide a more equitable future for higher education?
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Courtney. But I'd like to link my answer to one of the questions that Martin Webster from Neon asked on the chat about one of the challenges under the pandemic is that while you are busy, as our panelists are describing, busy trying to keep your students, to help those you have, reaching out to high schools is much more difficult, and there is a risk that we might just drop this part of the pipeline. And we're focusing on retention, and I think we should not forget all the important outreach and bridge work programs that we find again in many North American context and some of the European countries. I think we have to realize also that what is the universities and colleges are suffering from, same thing is happening in high school, that many students, especially those who are about to graduate or who graduated this year, will have a learning deficit, which might affect their chances of being admitted, especially in competitive institutions like Berkeley or other similar institutions. So, when you cannot do affirmative action, what kind of measures can you put in place so that you don't miss out on the most vulnerable, underserved members of the high school community, to make sure that you can bring them on board under the difficult circumstances that we are facing, and that we can serve them properly. So I think that's this area of outreach and bridge programs should not be neglected in the present context.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat for Jada, but anybody can jump in after that. And I don't know if you've seen it, but what do you think is the risk of considering only cost-benefit approach for access in higher education? Inequality, segregation, or segmentation of society?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but I think the risks of, there is a risk in considering only cost benefit or return on investment and only thinking about access to higher education in terms of financial bottom line. There's huge risk in that, because you miss out on the mission aligned and the values based reasons why you should be doing this. That it's the right thing to do. It's about equity for all and access for all, et cetera. I think that the reason I mentioned, your CFO and making sure that you make that business case is because particularly in this COVID moment, the people are protecting their core business, period. And And I think that in my work of diversity, equity, inclusion, you almost have to be multilingual. You've got to figure out what language you need to speak to different stakeholders so that they respond to you and give you and make the changes that you think are necessary. So when I talk about cost benefit analysis, I'm talking about one language that we need to speak in order to move the dial on equity, but not the only language. I hope that answers the question. I think that.
Yeah. And if I can add, because I think it's so important to lift up what you just said, Jada. I think one of the concept that comes to mind for me is to coalition build, right? That, as you were talking, I'm working, for example, with a donor who is only motivated with providing scholarship support to low-income students. But to take that, and this is where I think we've really learned, my area, when I talk about C3 as a cluster, when we, kind of were structurally first put together 10 years ago, it was out of a downturn in the budget. It was a restructure based on efficiency and budget, but we've really leveraged that to become a strength over time. And part of that has been for us to be nimble and to reflect the intersections of identity of our students in the programs and the support we provide. But what it also does is it makes us nimble to move. So that donor that only wants to provide scholarships, great. I can pair that with, another area that's providing the programming or the comprehensive academic guidance. And now we have a full set of 360 support for that particular student. So I think that the idea of kind of coalition building with partners, with different sources of funding, to me, it feels like we're this quilt and kind of I feel like there's all of these pieces of string that we're putting together constantly to best serve students. So for some folks, I think to your point, that it's a language we need to speak. It's what drives and motivates leadership, administration, and some donors, but always holding the values of what's right, what is the ultimate goal, where are we trying to move the needle?
Excellent. Carol, you mentioned about the importance of your students being on campus, that actually doing some of these things, and that they're concerned about they would not come back if you were online. And so one of the questions that we have is about thinking about broader innovation. So the examples from Canada, and in Canada, and working with the Indigenous communities, they're seeing incredible interest in creating remote community learning hubs, which enable social distance, connectivity, and some peer supports. These are challenging to think about in higher ed, but I'm curious, especially with Mitchell Tech, and thinking about these experiences and thinking about being innovative in other ways that your students can experience and be in these smaller communities, but maybe not on campus. Do you think about those things? I think about especially where you are located, that there may be experiences that are more remote.
Sure. And we do have one program that is technical education at a distance. It's our speech language pathology program. And we designed that 6 years ago, I believe now, surrounding that they wouldn't be necessarily on campus and they could take that coursework anywhere. So we have implemented regional labs. So 3 times a semester, the students are still required to report somewhere, but it could be closer to their hometown or wherever they're located, and not necessarily just in South Dakota either. So that's been a real positive model for us in bringing our technical education to an online environment. It's difficult to have power line, obviously not all of our programs would be able to do that, but finding an outreach area and providing the didactic learning necessary to do the skills could possibly be done. We do think about those things. We've tried to come up with a model that would work for all of our more complicated programs. The CARES Act funds also brought some equipment in that we've never had before. So for example, our welding department has a portable welder now that we can take on the road, which we never had before. So there are obviously avenues that we need to continue to explore to bring our technical education outward and make it more mobile.
Great. Carol again, and Jada, another question for you. This morning, as I was reading some of the newest research and news and survey findings, there were some survey findings that showed that adults without credentials, without a degree or certificate or certification, don't necessarily see the value in post-secondary education. And although they're facing unemployment or are currently unemployed or low wages, they don't quite see what that higher ed is going to help them. Knowing that both you, Jada and Carol, that your institutions serve, not just traditional age students, but also adults, how have you thought about your institutions as part of this economic recovery, or helping these individuals get some skills and knowledge so that they can go get better jobs and have better lives ultimately?
Right. We need to have more. We started an upskill program this summer that we offer across the state, 18 unique programs that have 18 credits or less, so that a student or a participant, if they don't want to be called a student, they can be called a participant, would complete the coursework from within 9 months and get the credential needed to be successful in the workforce. The difficult part of that is the industry folks have to identify what those credentials are, because if a student is coming to us and they're saying, I don't really see the value in spending $10,000 this year in obtaining a degree, what can get me a better job? What credentials do I need, and how do I get those credentials? So again, trying to find those stackable credentials so that when they do leave Mitchell Tech, maybe they don't have that associate's degree, but they have a certificate, a short-term or long-term certificate that will gain them access into a better paying job.
Yeah, I agree. It's about, I think, storytelling. We tell the stories of what a SNU degree has done for adult learners. And I mean, it's just so powerful to hear, particularly women who come to us and into our computer science program after dropping out, raising a family, and then deciding, in their 40s that they want to pursue a degree. They get a computer science degree and they're hired instantly into really well-paying jobs. And so telling those stories is really important. But like Carol says, is creating the pathway, the stackable pathway to a degree. So if we can get them to come in at the micro-credential level or at the associate's level, or just taking coursework without pursuing a degree, and then sort of nurturing them along towards the associates, the bachelor's, and then showing them the benefits of having a bachelor's, that's really what our approach, how we've been successful in attracting and retaining adult learners.
Super. I'd be interested from all of you. I mean, we're all in this together, especially those that are joining us live as well as watching this later. We all care very much about this and ensuring an equitable future for all of our nations, and thinking about what is the role that higher ed is playing. And so I think one of the most important things we can do is to learn from each other. Learn from the report that Jamil's put together and in each of your experiences. So I would love if you could each provide us what would be your advice or recommendations for other institutions when we want to think about ensuring this equitable future for higher education. Well, what would each of your advice be? Carol?
Well, my advice, go ahead.
No, you, Carol. Sorry.
Okay. I say my advice would be to take action. Obviously, as leaders in education, we can't just sit idly by and expect the students to come in both enrollment and in support services. We're the ones that have to make those decisions to be able to identify those gaps and design some plan of action to narrow those gaps. And I think data speaks, and we just need to listen.
Julian, what would you say?
One thing that comes to mind for me is, I just really elevating the historical context, because, we've been, obviously our talk today has focused on the pandemic, but, particularly here in the United States and our student communities, with everything that's happened this year, kind of the layer and layer upon kind of, we talk about on our campus that there's just this cycle of continuous injury and trauma. And with everything that's happened with anti-Black violence, with the elections, with the politics of the moment, I think there's this sense that we give great credit to students holding it together for so long, but all the combination of those things, like everything is just out. And so we can't expect folks to put it all back together. And how do we arm and help students with the support they need to navigate that environment? And part of that for me has been trying to offer historical context, right? That whatever the moment feels like now, pointing to other moments in history where there's been challenges, where we could point to the resilience of that moment, where we could speak to the resilience that folks are displaying as they navigate the challenges of the day. And resilience, I think, is we always need to be careful with that concept, because many times it's weaponized as putting the sole responsibility on students, but to lift up what they've been able to do so far as an indicator of their success in the future. Overall, I would kind of remind folks to challenge, affirm, support, not just the students they work with, but themselves and the staff and the leadership that they are. And again, it's interesting to kind of see some of the things that Jamil shared earlier, because it was one of my notes as well, to say to never stop learning, to think of ways to innovate and be forward thinking. The other thing that comes to mind for me is, if you're familiar with Adrienne Marie Brown's emergent strategy, just to remember that we're all fractals, right? That in our local context, it may seem like we're not having the most global impact, but compounded with everyone else working in that coalition, you can move the needle and have a large scale impact.
I love that, fractals. Yeah, I would say start with challenging your own deficit mindedness, and move other people, the influencers and the decision makers in your institution, to move away from deficit mindedness as well, because I think people don't see Black and brown and poor people as assets. They see them as deficits. They only see their needs and their struggles and their cost. But centering them in your innovation design is really going to be what moves the needle for your institution and make you an adaptable, nimble, and successful institution, is if you center the needs of the people at the margins. And so, but that requires a shift in your mindset. Moving from deficit to asset, I think, is my number one piece of advice. And then picking up on something Carol said about data, I think you have to start with the data. Focus on those disparate outcomes, ring the alarm bell about the dangers of not closing the gaps, and then build a strategy for closing the gaps. Because data is agnostic and it's objective, even though I know facts are for sale right now. But and the data and the gaps in outcomes will speak not only to the CFO, which is really important, but it will also speak to the social justice folks who are like, this is the right thing to do. This is not fair. These inequitable outcomes are not fair. And then I would just say accountability. Without accountability for meeting these targets and these goals, nothing is going to happen. So who in your institution can actually make a decision about holding people accountable, whether that's with a carrot or a stick? Like, you either get a reward for hitting the target, or you don't get a bonus for not hitting the target. But I think that that's really important.
Super. Jamil.
Thank you. A few points. I mean, what I see is that, in many countries, online education is seen as secondhand.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden it's become our mainstream. And I think that's a great shift that we will see, and will stay with us after the pandemic, hopefully. Partnership, I think that's, all of you have mentioned that. I think this is a great lab experiment in thousands of colleges and universities all over the world. There are so many lessons and pilots that we can learn from if we can share. And I see networks coming up, and both within countries and internationally. I think there is so much that we can learn from. I mean, Jada mentioned, data. We have a trove of data that we can learn from for the future. Also accepting that education is not only for high school graduates, and that we talk theoretically about the lifelong learning mission of universities and colleges. I think this is the opportunity to get more serious about that and embrace that as one of our main functions, if not the main functions, not only getting young high school leavers. And finally, how do we keep promoting this sense of belonging that was characteristic of life on campus, which now is impossible? How do we create this community of learners or participants and keep them engaged, whether they're learning on campus or remotely, and whether they graduate with one certificate or a degree and go to work, but keeping them engaged with the institution, because it's a lifelong purpose and journey that education is about.
Excellent. Any final words from each of you? Anyone?
I'll just say, I think this work is so big. It's hard to know where to start. It's just so big. It has so many tentacles. And so I would just say, pick a North Star. What is your North Star? And don't lose sight of it, and don't be distracted by it, because people will try to knock you off of your track, but pick that North Star and go for it. You can't do everything, and you can't do everything in 1 year or fiscal year, but don't lose sight of that one thing that you think is really going to move the needle and is really important.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would just add to that, I said earlier, kind of the importance of historical context, but related to that, I think for many of our students, no matter their experience or what they represent, traditional age, adult learner, we are the historical memory as well as student support, as teachers, as instructors. And at a moment like this, again, where someone may be experiencing something like this for the first time, if they are younger, or if it's just a disruption that's just so unfamiliar, I think that historical memory, the ability to serve as translator and guide at our institutions is so important right now. I said to a panel of staff the other day here on campus that what informs our equity work is equal parts, high-level expertise and care and compassion. And I think right now is a moment where if you want to lean towards the care and compassion a little bit more, I think that's totally appropriate.
Carol, you're on mute.
Sorry, I said, although this wasn't planned, it's interesting how, on the West Coast, the southern part of the state and the heartland, we all had the same things that we were talking about. And you're right, we need to start with the historical context of where we have been, and then reach for that North Star, like Jada says. And then I think it's very important too to celebrate the progress and celebrate the successes that you're experiencing as you're doing that. And when you start celebrating with the students and the staff and the faculty, it brings all of that importance and effort together and ties it all up in a nice package. And then you can say, yes, we've accomplished, we've grown, we've narrowed that gap. And this is what we're doing, and it's showing that we're successful. And it's a good plan.
Thank you. Jamil, any final word from you?
Well, if I may just, for all my working life, I've been guided by a principle that, I had this motto that learning never ends. And I think this pandemic has brought it, home in a much stronger way. And there is, it's just, the life-threatening dimension of what we're experiencing is so important. And that's why what Julian said about caring should be at the center of our work with and on behalf of equity, and sharing all these lessons that we are learning together. I think that's what can strengthen the equity movement and how we can integrate it into our work post-pandemic, which hopefully will be very soon.
Thank you. Thank you all. I agree with everything you said. I think we, Jade, as you said, this work is large, but this is the work. This is the most important work we can be doing, and we're at a point in time that I think we can accelerate it. I try to be optimistic with all the doom and gloom that this year has brought. There are some glimmers of hope out there, and Jamil, shared some of those with us. Each of you have shared some pieces of hope in your institutions and with your students. And so I do think we can accelerate those, but we have to do it now. We have to move quickly, but with compassion and care, as you said, and continue to learn from each other with opportunities like this to continue to share promising practices and research and ideas. So I thank you all so much for being part of this panel. This is a really incredible panel of perspectives and knowledge, experience, and ideas. And I'm honored to have been part of it with you all. Thank you for everybody who was able to join us in person, and for all of you who are sleeping now because you've been part of World Access to Higher Education Day all day and are taking a little break, but we look forward to connecting with you as you watch the recordings later on. As I mentioned, Jamil's report is available on luminafoundation.org under our resources, and we'll be pushing that out. And we'll also share it with the Wahed website so that everybody has access to it there also. So again, thank you so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your World Access to Higher Education Day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.